I didn't confront her. I didn't scream, cry, or beg for answers. I just left. No warnings. No second chances. No dramatic goodbye. I packed my bags, filed for divorce, and disappeared, not to punish her, but because I refused to fight for someone who had already made their choice. That was a year ago. Since then, I've built a new life, one where I no longer have to question whether I am enough, one where I finally feel peace. Then, out of nowhere, she found me. She wanted to talk, to explain, to ask for forgiveness. But some doors don't reopen. Some choices don't get a second chance. And as I sat there, knowing she was just outside waiting for me, I made my final decision. I wasn't going to see her. We met in our late 20s. It wasn't one of those whirlwind romances you see in movies. It was something deeper, something real. The kind of love that didn't need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. We just fit. She was smart, driven, always chasing the next big goal, and I loved that about her. I was steady, the kind of man who believed in commitment, in building something that lasted. To me, marriage wasn't just about love. It was about loyalty, about choosing each other every single day. And for years, I thought she felt the same way. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. But love makes you blind in ways you don't realize until it's too late. At first, the changes were subtle. She'd come home late, saying she was caught up at work. I never questioned it. She had always been ambitious, always pushing herself, always wanting more out of life. I admired that. So when the late nights became more frequent, I told myself it was just part of her job. When she started checking her phone a little too often, I ignored the way she tilted the screen away. When she became distant, when her kisses felt routine instead of real, when her I love yous started sounding like habits instead of feelings, I convinced myself that every couple goes through phases. But deep down, I knew. I just wasn't ready to face it. There was a time when we could talk for hours, about life, about the future, about stupid little things that didn't matter but somehow meant everything. Now, our conversations were empty, short, surface level. And the worst part? I was the only one who noticed. One night, we sat on the couch together. She was scrolling through her phone, smiling at something. "What's so funny?" I asked, trying to bridge the growing distance between us. She shook her head, still staring at the screen. Nothing important. That was the moment I realized I wasn't part of her world anymore. Love doesn't die in big, dramatic moments. It fades in the silence, in the quiet distances, in the spaces where words used to be. The first real gut punch came when I got home from a work trip earlier than expected. I had taken a red-eye flight, thinking I'd surprise her. I walked into our house, expecting to find her asleep. Instead, I found her in the kitchen, startled, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. There were 2 wine glasses on the counter, one of them half empty. She looked at me like she had been caught, but she recovered too fast. "You're home early," she said, forcing a smile. Something in her voice was off, too light, too casual, too controlled. I looked around. The dining table was set for 2. Candles, half-burnt. A faint scent of cologne lingered in the air, but it wasn't mine. "I had a friend over," she said, brushing past me, avoiding my eyes. "Just someone from work. We were going over a project." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But that feeling in my gut, the one I had been ignoring for months, screamed at me. This wasn't just a friend from work. Still, I let it go. Because the alternative, the truth, was something I wasn't ready for. So I stayed. I kept pretending. Kept telling myself that if I just held on a little longer, things would go back to the way they used to be. But love doesn't work like that. And neither does trust. Because once trust starts to crack, it never really stops breaking. And soon, I was about to learn just how far it had already shattered. People say you always remember the exact moment your heart breaks, the way the world around you shifts, the way time slows down, the way everything you believed in suddenly feels like a lie. For me, that moment came late one night. She thought I was asleep. For weeks, I had felt something was off. A part of me knew I needed to stop ignoring the signs, but I didn't want to be that paranoid husband, checking his wife's phone, looking for proof of something I wasn't ready to face. I had convinced myself that if I didn't look, I wouldn't have to deal with what I might find. But that night, I woke up to the sound of whispers. I opened my eyes, barely breathing, listening. She was lying next to me, curled on her side, her phone glowing softly in her hands. "I miss you too," she whispered. Her voice was quiet, but I heard every word. I didn't move, didn't react, just lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling my heart hammer in my chest. She giggled softly at something, then whispered, "I wish I could be with you right now." And just like that, everything inside me went cold. She wasn't texting a friend. She wasn't talking to a coworker about a project. She was lying in our bed, in our home, whispering to another man, while I was right there beside her. I could have confronted her, demanded answers, asked her why. But I didn't, because in that moment I realized something. It didn't matter. The damage was already done. The woman I had loved, the woman I had built a life with, she wasn't mine anymore. Maybe she never had been. I closed my eyes and waited for the sun to rise. The next morning, I left without a word. She kissed me on the cheek before leaving for work, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't spent the night whispering sweet words to someone else. I watched her walk out the door. And the second she was gone, I started packing. No notes. No warnings. No confrontations. Just silence. Some people think leaving without a fight means you don't care. But the truth is, sometimes silence is the loudest thing you can say. Because when she came home that night, expecting everything to be the same, expecting me to be there, she found nothing. She called. Then again. And again. I never answered. I blocked her number. Deleted our photos. Signed the divorce papers before she even had time to process what was happening. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was just done. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Starting over wasn't easy. At first, waking up alone in a place that didn't feel like home yet felt strange. But little by little, I started to breathe again. I worked more. Focused on myself. Hit the gym harder than ever before. Picked up hobbies I had abandoned. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about keeping someone else happy. I was just existing for myself. And it felt good. For an entire year, I never looked back. Never checked up on her. Never let curiosity pull me into her world again. She was the past. And I had finally learned to let go. I had finally stepped into my future. A year had passed. A year. Of silence, of rebuilding, of rediscovering who I was without her. For the first time in a long time, I felt whole again, unburdened by the weight of what she had done. My days were mine alone, filled with purpose, not regret. The past was a closed door, and I had no intention of reopening it. But then, one evening, as I walked toward my apartment, I saw her. At first, I thought my mind was playing tricks on me. A ghost from a life I had long buried. But then she turned, and our eyes met. And in that moment I knew she had found me. She stood near the entrance of my building, hesitant, her posture uncertain, her face worn in a way that had nothing to do with time and everything to do with regret. The confident, careless woman I had once known was gone. In her place stood someone who finally understood the weight of her own choices, someone who had lost something irreplaceable. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just stared, as if trying to recognize the strangers we had become to each other. Then, slowly, she took a step forward. "Hey," she said softly, her voice carrying none of the sharpness I remembered. "I've been looking for you." I didn't reply, didn't move. I simply waited. She shifted on her feet, as if expecting me to make this easier for her. But I wouldn't. That wasn't my responsibility anymore. "I know I don't deserve this," she continued, her voice unsteady. "But can we talk?" I exhaled slowly, my face unreadable. "Why now?" She hesitated. Her eyes flickered away, as if ashamed of the truth. Then, quietly, she admitted, "Because I made a mistake." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. "I thought—" She swallowed hard. "I don't know what I thought. I convinced myself I wanted something different. But I was wrong. And by the time I realized it, you were already gone." Her voice cracked at the last part, like she was only just coming to terms with it. But the thing was, I had come to terms with it a long time ago. I studied her face, searching for the woman I had once loved, but she wasn't there anymore. And neither was the version of me who would have cared. She took another step closer, her fingers twitching like she wanted to reach for me but wasn't sure if she should. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. That was when I almost smiled. Not out of amusement, but because I knew better. "You're not here because you love me," I said evenly. "You're here because he didn't love you." She flinched. Her lips parted as if to argue, but nothing came out. Because she knew I was right. If her new life had worked out, she wouldn't have come back. She wouldn't have thought about me, wouldn't have been standing here now, trying to stitch together the remnants of a life she had already shattered. But I wasn't her backup plan. I wasn't the safe choice after her risk failed. I took a slow step back, widening the space between us, an invisible boundary neither of us could cross. "Take care of yourself, Emily," I said, my voice calm, final. And just like that, I turned and walked inside, leaving her in the past where she belonged. The next morning, I went straight to a lawyer's office. No hesitation. No second-guessing. The paperwork was simple. No kids, no messy financial battles. I told my lawyer to make it clean, fast, irreversible. By the time she realized what was happening, it was already too late. She called from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Almost. But something in me wanted to hear what she had to say, just once. I answered, saying nothing. "You're divorcing me?" she asked, her voice small, as if she were the victim here. "Yeah," I said flatly. "I am." "Wait, can we talk? Please. I don't want to lose you." That was the moment I knew. She wasn't sorry for cheating. She was sorry she got caught. Sorry she lost her safety net. Sorry that the man she thought would always be there was suddenly gone. I let the silence stretch between us before answering. "You already lost me," I said. "You just didn't notice until now." Then I hung up, blocked her number, and closed the chapter for good. I moved out of the city. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere with no memories of her. At first, waking up alone in a place that didn't feel like home was strange. But little by little, I started to breathe again. I threw myself into work, focused on myself, hit the gym harder than I ever had before. I picked up hobbies I had abandoned during my marriage. For the first time in years, I wasn't living for someone else. I was just existing for myself. And it felt good. For an entire year, I never looked back. Never checked up on her. Never let curiosity pull me into her world again. She was the past. And I had finally stepped into my future. This version adds more depth, internal reflection, and emotion while maintaining the core essence of your original story. Let me know if you'd like any adjustments.